Iruka paced back and forth in her apartment. The air conditioner did little to ease her nerves. The pregnancy test in her trembling hand confirmed what she already suspected. Two bold lines stared back at her, unrelenting. How did it come to this? She whispered to herself as she sank into her couch. Edozie was her best friend since they were kids, her confidant, her anchor. But now he was also the father of the child growing inside her, and he didn't even know. It all began one fateful evening, 2 months ago. Edozie had just returned from London after completing his master's degree. They had decided to catch up at a cozy suya joint somewhere in Victoria Island. Ah, Iruka, Edozie said, leaning back in his chair, a mischievous grin lighting up his face, still as beautiful as ever. Iruka rolled her eyes, laughing. Please, Edozie, it's you the girls are hiding from. I'm sure half of London is heartbroken by now. Well, you know me, he replied with a wink, always keeping things interesting. Edozie was the quintessential ladies' man, a magnetic personality wrapped in effortless charm. But it wasn't just his physical appearance that drew women to him. It was his confidence, his ability to make every woman feel like she was the center of his universe, even if only for a fleeting moment. From a young age, he understood the power he had on the opposite sex. Girls would slip him notes, bake him cakes, or simply linger in the hallway hoping for a passing glance. By the time he reached university, his reputation as a charmer had solidified. He was the life of every party, the boyfriends of others' girlfriends, and the unrepentant heartbreaker. To him, relationships were games to be won, conquests to be tallied. He could be attentive and affectionate, showering a girl with compliments and sweet gestures, only to grow bored once the territory was conquered. When he felt like it was time to move on, he did so without much regret, often leaving a trail of broken hearts in his wake. Despite his nonchalant approach to love, he never promised more than he intended to give, though his charm often led women to believe there was more between them than there truly was. There were times when his carefree escapades landed him in trouble. A jealous boyfriend showing up unannounced, a girl insisting on more commitment than he was willing to give. Oh, and once, a pregnancy scare that left him panicking for weeks. But in all, Edozie turned to Iruka, who was his voice of reason, his fixer, the one who could diffuse tense situations with her calm demeanor and practical advice. But that line of friendship was blurred 2 weeks earlier after Edozie's return. It was a rainy night. The atmosphere was alive with music and laughter. They had both had too much to drink, and one thing led to another. The next morning, they avoided talking about it. Edozie brushed it off with his usual charm. It was a mistake, he said, his voice light. We were caught up in the moment. Iruka nodded, forcing a smile. Of course. Friends, right? Always, he replied, pulling her into a hug. Now, weeks later, Iruka sat in her apartment, her world turned upside down. How could she tell him? Would he even care? Iruka sat in her living room with her very good friend, Onome. Iruka, you can't keep this from him, Onome said, leaning forward. He deserves to know. Iruka shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. And then what, Onome? What if he cuts me off completely? I can't lose Edozie. He's been my best friend since we were kids. Onome sighed, exasperated. Look, I get it. You don't want to ruin your friendship. But this isn't just about you anymore. There's a child involved. His child. Iruka buried her face in her hands, her words muffled. How can I drop this on him and expect things to stay the same? Things won't stay the same, Iruka. They can't. But avoiding it isn't going to make it better. What's your plan? To hide the pregnancy forever? Iruka looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I don't know, Onome. I don't know what to do. I am scared. Onome's expression softened as she moved to sit beside her friend. I understand, babe, but you're stronger than you think. Edozie needs to hear this from you, not someone else. And who knows, maybe he'll surprise you. Iruka scoffed. Edozie doesn't do responsibility, Onome. You know that as well as I do. He'll probably freak out and run. Maybe, said Onome, but if he truly values you as a friend, he won't just abandon you. You have to trust that your bond is stronger than his flaws. Iruka was silent for a long moment, her mind racing. Finally, she whispered, what if he hates me for this? Onome smiled gently and said, then he's not the Edozie you've always believed him to be. You owe it to yourself and to this baby to find out. Iruka nodded hesitantly, wiping her eyes. Okay, I'll think about it. Onome gave her a side hug. That's all I'm asking. And no matter what happens, I've got your back, babe, okay? Iruka stood in her small kitchen, nervously stirring a pot of jollof rice. The scent of spices filled the air, but her mind was elsewhere, rehearsing the words she planned to say to Edozie. She had finally mustered the courage to tell him about the pregnancy, but the knot in her stomach refused to loosen. The doorbell rang, jolting her from her thoughts. She took a deep breath and walked to the door. Edozie, she greeted with a warm smile, but her face faltered when she noticed the woman standing beside him. Hey, Iruka, Edozie said, stepping inside with his signature charm. Hope you don't mind. I brought someone along. He turned to the woman and gestured. This is Nonye. Nonye extended her hand, her smile radiant. It's so nice to meet you. Edozie has told me so much about you. Iruka forced a polite smile as she shook Nonye's hands. Nice to meet you too. She led them to the dining table, her heart pounding in her chest. This wasn't part of the plan. As they sat down, Iruka noticed the glint of a diamond ring on Nonye's finger. So, Nonye, she began, trying to keep her tone light. How long have you known Edozie? Nonye's eyes sparkled as she glanced at Edozie. We met in London about a year ago. He proposed 2 months ago, and we're planning the wedding for December. Iruka's stomach dropped. She turned to Edozie, forcing a laugh. Engaged? And you didn't tell me. Edozie shrugged, smiling sheepishly. I wanted to surprise you. Things have been moving so fast, you know. Right, Iruka said, her voice tight as she reached for her glass of water. Throughout dinner, Iruka struggled to keep up the facade. Nonye was everything Edozie could have wanted. She was intelligent, she was poised, and stunningly beautiful. The way he looked at her with an affection Iruka had never seen before was a dagger to her heart. So, Iruka, Edozie said, breaking into her thoughts, what's new with you? You sounded like you had something important to discuss. Iruka froze, her hands trembling under the table. She glanced at Nonye, who was listening intently, her expression warm and curious. The words she had rehearsed all week evaporated. Oh, it's nothing. Just wanted to catch up. It's been a while since we hung out. Edozie nodded. Well, I'm glad we did, and now you get to meet Nonye. Isn't she amazing? Absolutely, Iruka replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As the evening wore off, Iruka felt like a spectator in her own home. When the couple finally left, Edozie gave her a hug. We'll catch up soon again, yeah? Thanks for dinner. Of course, she managed to say, holding back tears as she closed the door behind them. Once alone, Iruka collapsed onto the couch, burying her face in her arms. The man she had loved for so long, the father of our unborn child, was planning a life with someone else. The weight of the secret she carried felt heavier than ever. Iruka paced back and forth in her apartment, her emotions a whirlwind of anger, heartbreak, and despair. Onome sat on the couch, her arms crossed, as she watched her friend unravel. I can't believe him, Onome, Iruka exploded, her her voice cracking. He brought his fiancée to my house. How does someone do that? Onome sighed deeply. I'm sorry, babe. That was very insensitive of him, no doubt. But you can't keep bottling this up. He needs to know the truth. You need to tell him about the pregnancy. Iruka stopped pacing and turned to face her friend. And then what, Onome? What am I supposed to do? Walk up to him and say, oh, by the way, Edozie, I'm carrying your child. Congratulations on your engagement. Her voice dripped with sarcasm and her eyes brimmed with tears. Iruka, listen to me. This isn't about being desperate or ruining his happiness. This is about a child. Edozie deserves to know. And more importantly, your baby deserves to have a father. Iruka shook her head, stepping away. No, Onome. He's happy. He's in love with Noye. I'm not going to ruin that for him. I won't be the girl who comes between them. So what's your plan? Onome asked. To raise the baby on your own? While Edozie lives his fairy tale life? Completely unaware? That's not fair, Iruka. Iruka's voice broke off as she sank onto the couch. Fair? Nothing about this is fair, Onome. He's moved on. He's in love with her, not me. He's never looked at me the way he looks at her. What's the point in telling him? He'll just feel trapped. I know this hurts. I know you love him. And this feels like the worst kind of betrayal. But you can't let your feelings for Edozie cloud what's right for your child. This isn't just about you anymore, Iruka. Iruka wiped her tears, her voice steadier now, but still filled with pain. I've made up my mind, Onome. I'm not telling him. I will raise this child on my own. Edozie doesn't need to know. Onome looked at her friend, her heart breaking for her. Okay, if that's what you've decided, then I'll support you. But promise me you think about this some more. Don't make this decision out of anger or heartbreak. Take some time, Iruka, for your sake and the baby's. Iruka nodded weakly. I'll think about it. But for now, I can't. Onome hugged her friend tightly. I've got you, babe. Whatever you decide, I'm here for you. As Iruka clung to her friend, she felt a glimmer of comfort amidst the storm, though the weight of her decision lingered heavily in the air. It had been weeks since Iruka started pulling away from Edozie, and he couldn't understand why. Iruka had always been a constant in his life. She was his best friend, the one person he could always count on no matter what. But now, she was avoiding him, refusing his calls, declining his invitations, and finding excuses to avoid face-to-face conversations. He thought back to the last time they had spent together, dinner at her place when he introduced Noye. It had seemed like a pleasant evening, but now he wondered if he had missed something. Did I do something to offend her? He wondered aloud. Frustrated, he stepped out of the car and marched into the hospital. At the reception desk, he greeted the receptionist. Good afternoon, I'm here to see Dr. Iruka Eze, he said. The receptionist smiled politely. Good afternoon, sir. Dr. Iruka is in a meeting right now and won't be available for the rest of the day. Edozie frowned. Are you sure? Could you let her know I'm here? Tell her it's Edozie. I'm so sorry, sir, the receptionist said with an apologetic look. She gave strict instructions not to be disturbed today. Edozie sighed, nodding reluctantly. He walked back to his car, his frustration mounting. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later that evening, as he sat on the balcony of his apartment, Noye joined him. You've been quiet all evening, she said, sitting beside him. Is something bothering you? Edozie sighed, staring into the distance. It's Iruka. She's been avoiding me, and I don't know why. We've never had issues like this before. Nonya tilted her head, studying his expression. Maybe she just needs some space. You said she's been busy with work, right? It's more than that, Edozie replied, shaking his head. Iruka and I, We've always had this connection. She tells me everything, even the things she doesn't tell anyone else. For her to shut me out like this, it doesn't make sense. Naya hesitated before asking, "Do you think it's because of us? Maybe she feels left out now that we're engaged." Edozie looked at her, frowning. Why would she feel that way? She's always supported me no matter what. Nanya shrugged. Sometimes people don't say what they are really feeling. Maybe you should just give her time. Edozie sighed, leaning back in his chair. I just hope she's okay. I can't stand the thought of something being wrong and not being able to help her. He couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Iruka was hiding something from him. Something that could change everything. The engagement party was in full swing with music, laughter and clinking of glasses filling the grand hall. Edozie, dressed sharply in a tailored navy blue suit, moved through the crowd, greeting friends and family alongside Nonye, who looked stunning in her emerald green gown. He had long given up that Iruka would show up. Her silence over the past weeks had left a hollow ache in him. But tonight was supposed to be about celebrating his future with Nonye. Then he saw her. Iruka stood near the entrance, wearing a simple yet elegant black dress. Her presence caught him off guard, and for a moment, the bustling room seemed to fade into the background. Edozie excused himself from Nonye, who was chatting with a group of relatives. He made his way to Iruka, a mixture of relief and confusion on his face. "You came," he said as he hugged her warmly. Iruka offered a faint smile. He studied her, noticing the tension in her posture. "Are you okay? You look distracted. Can we talk?" "Privately," she asked. Edozie hesitated but nodded. "Sure." They found a quiet corner in the garden outside the hall. "So what's going on, Iruka?" Edozie asked, folding his arms. "You've been avoiding me for weeks, and now you show up at my engagement party asking for a private chat. What's going on?" Iruka took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "Edozie, I am pregnant, and it's your child." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. For a moment, Edozie just stared at her, his expression frozen in time. "What?" he finally said. "I'm pregnant," Iruka repeated, her eyes pleading. "I didn't plan for this, and I didn't know how to tell you." Edozie's shock turned to anger. "And you decided to tell me now? At my engagement party? I tried to tell you when I invited you over for dinner, but instead you showed up with her," Iruka said, almost at the top of her voice. Edozie shook his head, his voice rising. "This is insane, Iruka. Do you realize what you're saying? You've kept this from me for months, and now you're dropping this bomb on me? Tonight of all nights?" "I'm sorry," Iruka said, her voice breaking, "but I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to ruin your happiness with Nonye." She stepped closer, her voice desperate. "Edozie, I love you. I've always been in love with you, but you've been too blind to see it. Please, don't marry Nonye. Let's make it work, for the sake of our child." Edozie took a step back, his expression filled with panic. "This feels like sabotage, Iruka. You've always been there for me, but now it feels like you're trying to tear my life apart. I'm getting married, for God's sake." Desperate and broken, she stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Edozie, I'm not trying to sabotage anything. I love you. I've loved you for as long as I can remember." Edozie froze, staring at her as if she had spoken a foreign language. Then he let out a bitter laugh, one that sliced through Iruka like shards of glass. "Love me?" he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. "Now you decide to say this?" Tears ran down Iruka's face. "I didn't plan for any of this, Edozie. I tried to bury my feelings. I tried to support you, but I couldn't keep lying to myself." Edozie shook his head, his expression hardening. You've picked the worst possible time for this, Iruka. Do you realize what you're doing? This isn't about love, it's about control. You don't want me to be happy with Nonye? That's not true, Iruka cried, her voice cracking. I thought you deserved to know how I feel before it's too late. It's already too late, he said coldly. You've had all these years to tell me, Iruka. Why now? Because you're desperate? Because you think this pregnancy will change everything? Well, it won't. Iruka's legs felt like they'd give way beneath her. His words were like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. Blinded by her tears, she turned and bolted toward the exit, her only thought being to escape the unbearable weight of his rejection. Iruka, wait! Edozie called after her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't bear to hear another word. Iruka barely noticed the honking of horns as she darted across the road, desperate to reach her car. Watch out! Someone yelled, but it was too late. A car screeched as the driver slammed on the brakes, but the impact was unavoidable. The vehicle hit Iruka, sending her crumbling to the ground. Edozie ran out, his heart leaping into his throat as he saw her lying motionless on the asphalt. Iruka, he shouted, dropping to his knees beside her. Her face was pale, and blood trickled from a cut on her forehead. Call an ambulance, he yelled to the stunned driver. Iruka, stay with me, he pleaded, his hands trembling as he held her. Edozie sat in his car in the hospital parking lot. His mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts and emotions. For the past few days, he had spent hours by Iruka's bedside, watching her recover and wrestling with the weight of her revelation. She was carrying his child, and she was in love with him. He sighed deeply, staring blankly at the dashboard. His heart was torn in two directions. He loved Nonye. She was everything he had ever wanted in a partner. Beautiful, intelligent and sophisticated. Their relationship was stable and secure, and their engagement had brought a sense of direction to his life. But Iruka, she was his best friend, his constant, the person who had always stood by him, and now she was carrying his child, a reality he could not ignore. What am I supposed to do? He muttered to himself. The thought of telling Nonye the truth sent a chill down his spine. He could already imagine her reaction, shock, betrayal, and the inevitable end of their relationship. It was too much to bear. No, he whispered. She doesn't need to know. Not now, not ever. He reasoned with himself, convincing himself that he could manage the situation. He would marry Nonye as planned and still take care of Iruka and the baby. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only solution that seemed feasible. I'll provide for Iruka and the child, he thought. I'll make sure they are comfortable. I owe her that much. But a nagging voice in the back of his mind wouldn't let him rest. It whispered about fairness, about truth, about the consequences of keeping such a secret. He shoved those thoughts aside. He exited the car and walked into the hospital, his mind made up. When he reached Iruka's room, she was sitting up in bed, her face pale but showing signs of recovery. He forced a smile, pulling up a chair beside her. You're looking much better now, he said. I'm fine, she replied, though her voice carried an undercurrent of sadness. The baby is fine too. There was a long silence between them, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Iruka broke it. Have you thought about what you're going to do? She asked. Edozie looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Iruka, I don't know how to say this, but I'm still going to marry Nonye. Her breath hitched, and she looked down at her hands. I see, but I'll take care of you and the baby, he added quickly. I'll make sure you have everything you need. I'll be there for you both, I promise. Iruka nodded slowly, though her eyes filled with unshed tears. And Nonye, does she know? Edozie hesitated before shaking his head. No, she doesn't need to know. It will complicate things. I don't want to be just a friend, Edozie, Iruka declared, her eyes glistening with tears. Don't you understand? I want more. Edozie tried to speak, but she interrupted him. Let me finish. I've stood by you through everything. Your flings, your heartbreaks, your victories. I've loved you quietly, without asking for anything in return. But I can't do it anymore. Not when I know how I feel about you. Edozie tried to speak again, but she cut him off. I know you love me too, Edozie. You're just too foolish or too afraid to admit it. Edozie's head dropped into his hands, the weight of accusation pressing down on him. It's not that simple. It is that simple, Iruka countered, her voice rising. You're choosing to marry Nonye because it's easy? He looked up at her, his expression pained. Iruka, I can't just throw everything away. I'm in love with Nonye. I made a commitment to her. Then I guess that's my answer, Iruka said bitterly, crossing her arms over her chest. If we can't be lovers, then we can't be friends at all. Edozie stared back at her in shock. What are you saying? I'm saying I can't keep being your safe place, Edozie. Not when it's killing me inside. I deserve more than to be your backup plan. So if you can't see a future with me and our child, then I'm done. Edozie's heart sank at her words, and for the first time, he realized how deeply he had underestimated the strength of her feelings and the damage he had done. Iruka, please, don't do this. But Iruka shook her head, her resolve unshaken. I've already made up my mind, Edozie. I will raise this child on my own if I have to. I won't beg you for love, and I won't settle for less than I deserve. The wedding ceremony of Edozie and Nonye was nothing short of breathtaking, a true fairy tale event. Friends and family beamed as the couple exchanged vows, their love seemingly the perfect picture. But for Edozie, it was a different story entirely. As he stood at the altar holding Nonye's hand, he couldn't help but glance toward the back of the room, then the corners, and then the entrance, hoping for a glimpse of Iruka. She wasn't there, and her absence felt like a sharp ache in his chest. You may now kiss the bride, the officiant declared, pulling him back to the moment. He leaned forward and kissed Nonye, the crowd erupting into applause. Nonye smiled radiantly at him, her eyes filled with joy, but he couldn't muster the same enthusiasm. He moved through it all like a man on autopilot. He smiled for the photos, made polite conversations, and even managed a laugh here and there. But inside, he felt a gnawing emptiness. Edozie, are you okay? Nonye asked as they shared their first dance. She was stunning in her white gown, her beauty undeniable. Of course, this is the happiest day of my life. Nonye smiled, searching his face. You sure? You seem distracted. Edozie pulled her closer, spinning her gently as the music swelled. I'm fine, Nonye, really, just overwhelmed. I guess it's a big day, that's all. Nonye nodded, her smile returning. Later, as Edozie sat at the head table, watching Nonye laugh with her friends, the emptiness grew heavier. This was supposed to be the pinnacle of his happiness, wasn't it? He was marrying the woman he loved, wasn't he? So why did he feel like something was missing? Or more accurately, someone. He thought of Iruka, her laughter, her sharp wit, the way she always understood him without needing words. He thought of the last conversation they had, the pain in her voice, as she told him she couldn't just be his friend anymore. Edozie, where's your mind at? His best man Kunle asked, snapping him out of his thoughts. Nowhere, Edozie said quickly, straightening up. I'm just thinking about how lucky I am. Kunle gave him a knowing look but said nothing. As the night wore on, Edozie kept up appearances. He danced, he toasted, and he smiled for the camera. But inside, he felt empty. He tried to convince himself that the feeling would pass, that Nonye's love would fill the void Iruka had left behind. But as he and Nonya waved goodbye to their guests and headed to their honeymoon suite, a single thought echoed in his mind. What have I done? It was 4 months after the wedding. The atmosphere in Edozie and Nonye's home had grown heavy over the past few months. On the surface, their lives were picture perfect, but Nonye couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Edozie. The spark that once lit up their conversations had dimmed. The warmth in his eyes when he looked at her seemed clouded by something she couldn't quite place. He was attentive and kind, but there was a distance between them that she didn't know how to bridge. One evening, as they sat in their living room, Nonye decided she couldn't hold back anymore. Edozie, can we talk? He looked up from his phone, sensing the weight in her tone. Of course. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. It's about Iruka. Edozie stiffened, his expression guarded. What about her? I've been thinking, why didn't she come to our wedding? You said she was busy, but I don't believe that. I've seen the way you act whenever her name comes up. There's something you're not telling me. Nonye, please, let's not go down this road. No, Edozie, she insisted, her voice firm. We need to. I need to understand what's going on. Was she in love with you? The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Edozie opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. His silence said it all. Nonye's heart sank. Wow. She was. And you? Edozie, are you in love with her? No. Nonya, I married you because I love you. Iruka, she's just a friend. Or she was. Just a friend? Nonya asked. Edozie, I know what I see. Your mind is somewhere else, and it's been that way since our wedding. If she's just a friend, why does she seem to have such a hold on you? Edozie stood and began pacing the room, struggling to find the right words. It's complicated, Noye. Iruka and we've known each other forever. She's always been there for me. She ended our friendship. You don't just expect me to get over it overnight, do you? Nonya got up, her eyes locking with his. No, I don't, Edozie. But it's been months. By now, you should be over her. You have a brand new life with me. And friendship doesn't make a man look as haunted as you do. It doesn't make him lose sleep or smile less. Tell me the truth, Edozie. Did you choose me because I was easier? Because I was safer? Her words cut deep and Edozie felt his defense crumble. I chose you because I love you, he said, his voice quieter now. I do, Noye. Please, don't make this any harder than it already is. With that, he walked away. Edozie and his best man, Kule, had decided to meet up after work. Kule leaned back in his chair, watching his friend with concern. All right, Edozie, spill it. What's going on? You've been walking around like a man carrying the weight of the world. Edozie sighed heavily. It's a mess, Kule. Everything's a mess. Kule raised an eyebrow. Define mess. Edozie hesitated, then took a deep breath. It's Iruka. She's pregnant for me. What? Kule exclaimed, nearly choking on his drink. Iruka, pregnant for you? Kule let out a low whistle. Man, what have you done? Does Nonya know? No, not yet. And I don't plan on telling her. At least not now. Kule stared at him in disbelief. Edozie, are you listening to yourself? This isn't something you can just sweep under the rug. Sooner or later, it's going to come out. I know that, Edozie snapped, his frustration boiling over. But what am I supposed to do, Kule? I can't just abandon Iruka and the baby. But I can't destroy my marriage either. I'm stuck. Kule leaned forward, his tone serious. Let me ask you something. Are you in love with her? Edozie fell silent, staring into his glass. Then finally he muttered, I don't know, man. What do you mean you don't know? You've known her practically your whole life. You either love her or you don't. It's not that simple. Even if I did love her, it doesn't matter. I gave up the chance to be with her when I married Nonye. And honestly, Kule, I have a habit of ruining things. If I got into a relationship with Iruka, I'd mess it up, just like I always do. Then it will ruin our friendship completely. Kule shook his head. But you've already lost her friendship now, haven't you? She's not talking to you. She didn't come to your wedding. You've already ruined it, Edozie. So what's really holding you back? Edozie sighed again, his shoulders slumping. Fear. Guilt. I don't know, Kule. I'm trying to do the right thing by Nonye, but everything I do feels wrong. Kule sat back, studying his friend. You've got to figure it out, Edozie. You can't keep stringing everyone along. Nonye, Iruka, yourself. If you keep running from the truth, it's going to catch up with you. And when it does, it's going to hurt a hell of a lot more than it does now. Edozie nodded slowly, knowing Kule was right. But knowing what he needed to do and finding the courage to do it were two entirely different things. Months had passed. Edozie and Nonye forged ahead with their marriage. Edozie sat on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through his phone. He had been trying to focus on work, on his marriage, on anything but the gnawing emptiness he felt since learning Iruka had left the country. His attempts to contact her had failed, and he tried to convince himself it was for the best. Then one day, out of the blue, his phone rang. It was Omoye. Her voice was frantic. Edozie, it's Iruka. She's in trouble. Edozie bolted upright. What? What happened? She went into labor, Omoye explained, her voice cracking. But there were complications. She lost a lot of blood, Edozie, and now she's in a coma. She's in a hospital in Abuja. The words hit Edozie like a punch to the chest. Oh God, please, not her. I can't lose her. What's going on? Nonye's voice cut through the air as she walked into the living room. Edozie ignored her, his focus on Omoye. What about the baby? Is the baby okay? The baby is fine, Omoye said, her voice softening. But Edozie, you need to come quickly. I'll be there, he said, ending the call. Nonye crossed her arms, her tone sharper now. Edozie, what's going on? What does this have to do with you? Edozie hesitated, his heart pounding. He had been trying to avoid this moment for months, but there was no escaping it now. It's Iruka, he began, his voice uneven. She's in the hospital. There were complications during her labor. Nonye's eyes narrowed. Labor? She was pregnant? And why are you so worked up about this? Isn't the baby's father the one who should be rushing to her side? Edozie took a deep breath, his stomach churning. Nonye, the baby is mine. The room fell into silence. Nonye stared at him. What did you say? The baby is mine. Nonye took a step back, her hand covering her mouth. What? You lied to me. All this time, you lied to me? You promised you weren't in love with her. You said you were just friends. And we were, Edozie insisted. I didn't plan for this to happen, Nonye. It was a mistake. But the baby? Nonye cut in, her eyes blazing. You've been lying to me for months. And now you expect me to just accept this? You promised me honesty, Edozie. You promised me a life without secrets. I know I did, he said, his voice breaking. And I'm sorry, I didn't want to hurt you, Nonye. But Iruka, she's in a coma. I have to go to her. Nonye shook her head, tears running down her face. You've already made your choice, haven't you? You're going to go to her. I have to. It's my responsibility. Nonya turned away, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Edozie wanted to comfort her, to say something to ease her pain, but he knew nothing he could say would fix this. Instead, he grabbed his key and headed for the door, his heart heavy with the weight of the mess he had created. As he drove to the airport, his mind raced with fear for Iruka and guilt for Nonye. He didn't know how he would navigate the chaos ahead, but one thing was certain: he was not going to abandon the mother of his child.